This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to...
This is Nos Audietis.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is good.
Seattle Sounders, the greatest MLS team in history.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Paul McKay says, cheat!
We want to win. Let's see how the Sunday, bro.
Good for Seattle!
Welcome to another edition of Nos Audietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our Substack subscribers. This is episode 395, actually 396, and we're recording on Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. I am your host, Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is Aaron Campo and our producer, Lickett. After a few weeks of disappointing results, but some play that was at least decent at times, the bottom kind of fell out against Vancouver. The Sounders started slow and never really got on track, and they lost to the Whitecaps 2-0, their fourth straight loss against Cascadia opponents, and more frustratingly, their fourth loss in 7 games overall. This one was among the most depressing, not necessarily because of the scoreline, but because of how bad the Sounders looked throughout. The fight that has at least always been there was nowhere to be found. There were sloppy passes throughout, a lack of creativity on offense, and just some generally uninspiring play. I guess my question to you, Aaron, is where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you said it pretty well in that the scoreline isn't terrible on its face. Vancouver's played pretty well, 2-0 on the road. All right, not great, but I think it really flattered the Sounders in this game. I think this was, their worst performance of the season. They've had losses that maybe felt worse or were more lopsided, although have they had a more lopsided loss? But
no.
They just
they lost 4-1 to Portland.
This was worse than that game, I think, for sure.
Way worse.
The Sounders for long stretches of time against Portland looked pretty good. We were talking about this before we started recording. The Sounders just did not look good. They didn't look like previously this year. They've had games where they looked like a good team that was struggling to do X, struggling to create or struggling to defend or whatever it was. And this game, they did not look like a good team at all. They didn't look dangerous in any way. They looked completely disorganized defensively. Just in every phase of the game, they looked just poor. And it reminded me for the first time this year of the way they looked last season, where not only were the results bad, but you didn't see anything from the performances that made you think, this is a team that can turn it around. Now, I'm not saying that's the case with this team, but if they have more games like this, if this is becomes a trend, then I think you really have to have that concern.
Yeah, it made me think, frankly, a lot of the last time they were in Vancouver, which you may remember was a 2-1 loss, and it was coming, I believe, right on the heels of a 3-0 win over Austin, ironically enough, or coincidentally enough, and that felt like, okay, this is maybe that, and that I remember that 3-0 win felt like maybe this is where the season turns around, and it didn't. It did not at all. And I may be misremembering. There may have been another game between those two, but I remember the game in Vancouver last year, late in the season, really felt like where, okay, maybe this isn't going to happen. Like the turnaround that we've been sort of waiting on that is seemingly around the corner just isn't going to happen. And the only difference was that time they were able to grab a very late consolation goal that sort of made the score look a little bit better. But this one, there was maybe just as well. Hebert had a pretty decent chance in the 95th minute that could have made the score a little bit better. But I don't know that would have been a net positive. This is a game they deserve to lose by multiple goals, and maybe it was like a better message that way. I mentioned that Hebert shot. That was the Sounders' first shot in the second half since the 65th minute. They went 30 minutes without shooting in the second half while they were down 2-0. It was just, there was nothing there. There was nothing to build on. I thought there were maybe a few decent performances right at the beginning of the second half. Cody Baker and Dylan Tevez came in for Leo Chu and Nuhu, who I think were both probably not quite ready to start for one reason or another. They did not look particularly sharp. Nuhu at least had some effort there, but he just did not look like himself. And there was a little bit of a uptick in terms of energy and quality right at the start of the second half, but it was short-lived. And it was just there wasn't anything there. Like, this is a team that's too good, too talented to just look as poor as they did, I thought, against Vancouver. And I suppose there's something to be said about playing on short rest, and you can come up with excuses, I suppose, to explain away the performance. But at the end of the day, it just didn't look like I'm not someone who calls out heart and effort that often, because I tend to think it's a crutch that people use just when they don't like a result. But this was one where I can't blame anyone for questioning that stuff.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the mentality of this team is not one that's going to allow them to consciously, dog it.
Right.
But like you said, if you don't want people to think that, you got to do a little better than this. And
right.
There have been games this year where they've been trailing and they haven't managed to get a goal, but they were creating chances.
The Austin game
is a great example. And I think we talked about that pretty extensively, where they didn't score, but they were creating lots of chances. They didn't just, resort to pumping balls into the box. They were making things difficult till the very end for Austin. And in this game, it looked like they were winning 2-0. Like, if you didn't know who the teams were and you saw the way they were the way the two teams were playing,
right,
and you knew it was 2-0, you would assume the Sounders were the ones that had the lead, because there was just no urgency.
Right.
And whatever the reason is, I mean, frankly, I'm not super interested in finding out. Like, it's none of my business. I just don't want to see the Sounders play that way ever, especially against a Cascadia rival. And that's the thing whenever we have these games against Vancouver, that the rivalry is not the same level or anywhere close to the same level as it is with Portland, but you still want to win the Cascadia Cup. You still want to beat your rivals.
Yes.
And there's still, ostensibly teams you're competing against in the Western Conference. And so to come out this flat and never ramp it up at all, I think is just inexcusable. I don't care what kind of rest you're playing on. It's not like they had to fly across the country for this game.
No, not at all.
I think, I'm sure that if I were to really, dig deep into the back of my head, I could find some more disappointing games, more disappointing performances in this team's history. But this, I think, was the worst one in a while to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was very bad. It was at the very least the worst performance of the year, and I don't think it was particularly close. It was sort of the mirror image performance of the RSL game earlier this year, where they dominated the game and they only won 2-0, but that was sort of like we knew that they had outplayed RSL by more larger margin than that, and this was just. Yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't, there was nothing really to build off of. And it's the kind of game that makes you think there needs to be some real changes. I don't know necessarily what those are. I mean, the reality is the Sounders are still dealing with somewhat of a short roster in that they're missing some key components, some of whom are supposed to be coming back relatively soon. We can talk about that later. But like one of those changes you would hope would have, or two of those changes you were hoping would be maybe the reintroduction of Nuhu and Leo Chu into the lineup. And I don't know, maybe a week, they get a whole week of training under their belt and maybe they look a lot better. But nothing about their performance on Saturday made me think, okay, they got to get back into the lineup. That'll fix everything.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the answers are probably going to be out for at least a couple more weeks. The answers as I see them, the changes, the players that are going to change things enough that you really feel like it's more of a seismic shift, right? I think Christian is the key to this. Like I really, it's harder and harder for me to ignore.
Yeah,
that he goes out and this team just falls off a cliff. And
they were 5-1-1 when he was in the first 7 games, all of which were games he started in. They have been 2-4-1 since then.
Yeah, and we saw it last season as well. You know, they had kind of started to turn it around coming out of the CCL. He gets hurt, and they never looked the same again. And I don't know. I love Christian. I think he's a great and very underrated player. I don't think that his talent alone is enough to explain that. Like, I don't think he is such a critical piece because the Sounders looked great early this year without Rui Diaz, right? So we know
they
that
looked
they
great at times without João Paulo. They've looked, I agree.
But so I don't know if it's something specific that he does in that role. I don't know if it is a leadership thing. I don't know what it is.
Those pregame speeches.
Yeah. I mean, it could be like it makes more sense to me than, you know, it's just a fluke, right? Like,
right. I mean, there's definitely something to it. You know, and who knows, maybe this was a wake up call. I mean, I'm not convinced that this team is just old and past it. I still think most of these guys have something in the tank that they can pull together. And it's not like these are old players. Most of these guys are like in their early 30s. These are players who should still be perfectly capable of putting in good performances. You know, maybe Nico Ladero can't start 3 games in a week like he did last week. Even if and it's possible the data says otherwise, but his performance and Nico Ladero has not looked himself during this 7-game run at all. Like, he has not had, you know, at the start of this, he was he was a borderline MVP candidate, I thought, after the first 7 games, and he has not looked anywhere near that recently. João Paulo did get some rest on Saturday. I'm glad that he was at least able to, maybe that was the positive. João Paulo got some rest, but you know, he's been up and down. I think his performance dipped on Wednesday, and so maybe he's another guy. Like, I do think the Sounders probably need to look for ways to get you know, Nico some rest. Maybe that means playing Albert Rusnak at the 10. Maybe that means using Josh Atencio a little bit more in midfield. I guess another one, I wasn't displeased with Javier Arriaga, I suppose. Like, he wasn't great, but he, you know, like I don't think he was. He at least showed that he's capable. But there were a lot of bad performances, and one who I don't take any pleasure in calling out, because I do think that Alex has been mostly pretty good this year, but he definitely wears a bit of the blame on the first 2 goals. The first one, where it was the Sounders looked, they got a huge break because Pedro Vite got the ball in the box and was in on goal, but then had a horrible first touch in which Alex is able to get to the ball first, and then I don't know what happens. Instead of clearing it, he tries to sort of shield Vite, and I guess maybe trying to shield it for Fry to get, but Fry is a little slow off his line, and Vite is able to sort of like work his way around Alex and score that. Just a real kind of frustrating play. And that had also started when Leo Chu failed to control a clearance, or not a clearance, a goal kick. And then similarly on the last goal, Alex had a very bad first touch, turns it over, and then it's off. It's sort of like a counterattack that ends with Ryan Gold hitting a shot that Fry almost saves, but hits off the post, and then the ricochets off the post, off his head and in. There's some dispute as to whether or not that was an own goal or not, but either way, it was a very savable shot, but also a mistake that Alex made in turning it over. But just to give up 2 goals on plays like that was very frustrating.
Yeah, I think that, and that's sort of been a hallmark, I think, even though maybe the Sounders have not played this poorly over this whole run, I do think that that has kind of been a hallmark of this bad run, is that they're just giving up goals and making mistakes that are uncharacteristic and I think unacceptable for how much experience this defense has. I think you can forgive Cody Baker to some degree, although he hasn't been making a ton of mistakes. But other than that, like everybody on the team, Jackson Reagan, okay, he's not like a grizzled veteran, but he's a veteran. Yamar obviously has a lot of experience. Alex has a lot of experience, and they're just not playing up to a standard, I think, that is even the minimum level of acceptable. And that's when this team is good, when this team is at its best, there's so much strength in their defense, and it allows them to do so much more in the attack. And they just have not looked comfortable defending at all. They're making really uncharacteristic mistakes. They're giving up soft goals. And Stephen Fry has been, I think, a pretty common topic of discussion this year.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not a Stephen Fry is past it guy at all. I think that he's still easily in the top half of goalkeepers in the league, but he's definitely not at a caliber that he was when he was able to bail out the defense single-handedly.
He's definitely not. He hasn't been doing that much at all.
Yeah.
He had a couple games early in the season where he did that a little bit. He has not been doing that the last few weeks at all.
Yeah. And he shouldn't, it's great when he was at a level where he could do that, or he was doing that regularly, but that's not something you should have to depend on. Like, your defense should not be playing as poorly as the Sounders defense is playing. And I mean, maybe, we talked about needing to make changes, needing to make maybe major changes. Maybe that's where some of the changes come. I don't really know who you put in at right back. If you feel like you need to give Alex a game or two off, I think center back's a little easier, but
I wouldn't mind seeing Reed. I don't necessarily think that this is the game where you need to see Alex benched, but I wouldn't have minded to see Reed get a start in one of the games last week.
Yeah.
Reed Baker Whiting, that is.
Yeah, I do think, and that's been, I think, a criticism that applies to most coaches in most sports in most leagues across the world. But I do think if there is a criticism I have of Brian and have consistently had, it's that he's very much a these are my guys kind of coach. And when they're available, they're going to tend to play. And sometimes riding the hot hand is the thing to do. But when the hand is not hot, it's tough to see the logic in doing that and taking that approach. I mean, it's putting Alex or Yamar or whoever on the bench for a game is not telling them you're not a starter on this team anymore.
Right.
It's telling them you're not playing this game.
Right. And that was one of the things I think last year that I think we came to understand was there wasn't really this genuine competition in training, and that sort of like if certain guys were healthy, they were going to start. And I think the Sounders actually did a pretty good job of not doing that early in the year. And some of that was choice. Like the reality was they had more players to choose from. And so they could afford to have a little bit more of an open competition. But it does feel like in the last few weeks, especially, that we've kind of gone back into this trap of defaulting to the starters, whoever that may be. And, to some degree that's understandable, but I just hope that this is sort of like, we have a lot of season left, I guess we have 20 games left in the season, plenty of time to turn things around. The Sounders have 3 home games coming up right now. it wouldn't be totally crazy if they won all 3 of these games and we are looking back on this like, hey, remember when we were freaking out a couple weeks ago? I sure hope that's what we end up saying at the end of this.
Yeah.
But point being, there's plenty of time to turn this around, but there's also plenty of time for it to just get even worse and this to be a horrible ride. So hopefully we take some lessons from this, that we take a hard look at why things went so badly last year, and we just refuse to repeat it.
Yeah, I mean, that's about all you can do, right? Is to say we're not going to lose games anymore. We're not going to do that. Now,
not going to beat ourselves.
Yeah, figuring out how to do that, that's where the details are, but that's
right.
That's why they get paid the big bucks, right? Like
exactly.
Not our problem to figure out. But I do think that this has to be a turning point in the year. I really do feel like if things keep sliding or even just like reach some stasis, it feels like it could get bad pretty quickly. And after the way the season started, that would be very unfortunate, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place to take a break. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about where some of these changes might happen, some of the things that are, I feel like they're in the works. And you're listening to No Sadietas. Watson's Counter wants to thank everyone for their patience, but now the wait is over. Located at 6420 24th Avenue Northwest in Ballard, they've reopened in a brand new location with the same bomb-ass coffee and the same dumbass vibes. You can still expect their classics like the gochujang fried chicken sandwich and Fruity Pebbles French toast, alongside their new soft serve program and their world-class coffee. Make sure to follow them on Instagram for all the latest and greatest. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So we have a full week of training going into this next game. Sounders are going to be hosting New York Red Bulls. And then who do they host after that?
I just had it up, and then
I should know that. Then they host San Jose, and then they host the Portland Timbers in that doubleheader. So they have a weekend game against Red Bulls, midweek against San Jose, and then weekend against Timbers. And then they go back on the road. Wouldn't need to worry about that. Look ahead to these 3 games. I think it's probably makes sense to do some rotation against San Jose. So to some degree, we're probably going to get what we ask for at some point. But what I wanted to get into right now is some of the changes that we might, or maybe not even some of the changes, but some of the possible changes that the Sounders could try. One of them, and maybe the most obvious, is where to play Jordan Morris. We saw him play on the left, on the right. I don't think he started at the 9 last week, or he definitely didn't start at the 9, but I'm not sure if he played at the 9 last week. But where do you want to see Jordan Morris playing? He's now gone 8 games without scoring. He looked okay against Austin at times. He did not, he looked like his effort was there against the Vancouver. He was tracking back a lot, but man, he seemed to be pinned. He was pretty emblematic of the Sounders' struggles in that even though Vancouver was throwing numbers forward or committing a lot of players to the press, there was space in behind. If the Sounders could exploit it, they had Leo Chu and Jordan Morris on the field. They could not exploit it. It did not come close to being exploited.
Yeah, I think that I don't really know if it matters where Jordan plays right now, because I don't think that this is a positioning issue with him. I'd rather not see him play on the right, all things being equal, because I do think that his skill set just works better in the middle or coming in off the left. But I think with Jordan, it's a lot more about confidence. And I also think it's a lot more about teams kind of know that Chu and Morris are not getting found. Right? Like they're still making the runs. They're still doing some of the things off the ball that made them so successful, but the ball's not getting to them because the midfield has just been kind of a mess. And so I think that that's part of it. I think you got to figure out how to not only get those players into that space and behind, but also make teams think that they have to worry about anything else. And I think that that's what it is that teams know as long as we don't allow the creative players to find those runs in behind, we don't really have a lot else to worry about. And I think that was kind of borne out in this game. So, I think I'm assuming Raul's not going to be back in time for, I guess, maybe Portland.
I would think that's my suspicion. Is I kind of think they are targeting the Portland game. Today at training, they talked about how, well, they mentioned that Raul is still not full into training, that he's supposed to be closer to full in tomorrow. That's Wednesday. And then they'll, sort of assess his status at that point. He hadn't been ruled out for this weekend, but that's sort of like, it feels to me like they're maybe not going to hold him out entirely from the San Jose game, but if I were to guess, maybe they bring him off the bench against San Jose and then sort of assess whether or not they think how many minutes he can go against Portland.
Yeah. And so in that case, I think I would be okay with seeing Jordan start up top. If for no other reason than he's probably going to get more touches that way, at least. And I do think we kind of talked about this in the last show. I think Jordan is a confidence player. And
yes,
while I think that there are systemic issues, I don't think it's fair to say he's not succeeding because he's in his head. I do think it's an element. Like, I think there's no question that that's the case. So if you can get him touches, ideally, close to the box, in the middle of the box, maybe that can help improve his confidence. So I wouldn't mind seeing him up top. Hebert, I still like Hebert. I still think he's a good player, but they just haven't done a whole lot with him starting in the last few games. And I think that if you're going to change things, like if you're going to make drastic changes in response to these results, that's a reasonable one, I would say. So, I really do think that it's less about where Jordan is lining up and more about they're not getting him the ball, and he has almost zero confidence right now.
Yeah. So the other big one that I think is another interesting question is, who's the 10? I think Nico Ladero probably is your default 10, but is it worth giving Albert Rusnak a look there?
I don't know. I mean, I think Nico could probably use a day off.
Yeah, I would definitely. I think one of the games, I think my hope is that he is not the starting 10 on Wednesday, and that the only other player they've started at the 10, I think, is Hebert, which I really hope we don't see again.
No, never again. Yeah, I mean, I like Albert in that position. I think that ideally, if he's starting on the right, he can do some of the same types of things that Christian is able to do. And because he plays a little bit less like a traditional winger, he plays like more of a box-to-box player that can cut inside a little bit more and take some of the pressure off of Nico in the center of the pitch. But I certainly wouldn't be opposed to seeing Rusnak play in that 10 position. I don't really want to see Nico play on the right. I just think I think that he has physical limitations at this point in his career that make that a little bit tougher of a sell. And in that case, if you're playing Albert at the 10, you're not playing Nico on the right, then is Nico playing in the pivot with JP? Does that create other problems?
I hope it's okay. I mean, I would think it's like, give Nico a day off.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with giving Nico a day off. No,
and
no
I think
question about it.
And maybe it's JP and Atencio in the middle instead. Maybe it's Atencio and Kitahara. I'd actually be okay with that. Not necessarily looking forward to that, but I don't think it would be a disaster if we gave that a look. I think there's some things that we can change up there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth giving a look, because I'm not convinced that Rusnak is the better 10 than Ladero, all things being equal, but I do think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, I think most things are worth exploring at this point.
Just
because it has been so long since they looked dangerous in attack. Even as we've talked about, it hasn't been this bad. It hasn't been great either, especially when
they
it
haven't
comes
scored
to
more
creation.
than a goal since the St. Louis game.
And I think too that it's not it's not even just about the lack of creativity, the lack of goal scoring, although those are pretty big problems, but it's also about the fact that their midfield has just kind of gotten overrun consistently for a while now, which is not going to set you up for success. I mean, that's
it's been a long time since they've dominated the midfield.
Yeah. And so I think whatever you've got to do to at least get back on even standing in midfield, so where you're not getting overrun and you're not having to play down the flanks almost exclusively, and have your fullbacks bailing out your center backs all the time because they're under so much pressure. Whatever you can do to get away from that game state, I think it's worth whatever kind of experimentation you have to do or you're willing to do.
Yeah. Any other changes that you're hoping to see? I feel like the rest is sort of deck chairs.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing Arriaga a little more. I wouldn't mind seeing Reed Baker-Whiting, and I think at some point in this stretch, you need to give him a day off, or you need to give Alex a day off, rather.
Right.
Left back is tough. I mean, Nuhu is either fit or he's not. I have a feeling he's not going to be capable of playing 3 games in a week for sure. Considering what he's dealing with fitness wise. So, and I think Baker has been good. Like, I think it's been.
Yeah, I've actually really liked Cody Baker. I feel like he could potentially be a long-term starter. Maybe not an all-star, but he is absolutely someone who's not going to lose you games from that position, and can every now and then do something really positive.
Right. It's definitely the kind of thing where you don't feel like you have to rush Nuhu back. I think he's been more than serviceable at left back. So I think it is less the personnel and more tactical changes and just changing mentality. There's definitely changes I'd like to see. I'd like to see a lot more rotation. I would like to see them try some different things in terms of which, where Nico's playing, where Rusnak is playing. But I do think that they're going to have to take a different approach tactically. And I think that what they were doing earlier in the year, they're not capable of doing anymore. They're continuing to try to play that way. And whatever the issues are, whatever it is that they can't figure out or they can't get right, you can revisit that once you've righted the ship, right? But you've got to figure out a different way to not find yourself completely behind the 8 ball from kickoff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will, the Sounders catch the Red Bulls at an interesting time. They are coming off a midweek game in the Open Cup. They are also, they just changed coaches. I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who used to be in charge of New Mexico United and then took an assistant job with Red Bulls seems to be doing a pretty good job. So they've sort of corrected their early season form, but this is definitely a winnable game for the Sounders. There's no reason they can't go into this one feeling like they can sort of turn things around, and maybe it's good that they're not facing a team on a losing streak, because teams facing on losing streaks have had sort of their or winless streaks have been having their way with the Sounders. So maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there is something to that where if they have a game that they feel like is going to be a little more challenging, like maybe that changes the approach they take. I don't know. Right. Although I feel like at this point you've got to figure maybe we shouldn't be going into games assuming we're going to dominate anyone.
Right. Yeah. That's probably that's probably a good way of putting it. But all right. Well, let's call this a show. Later in the week we'll do an episode where we take your questions. We did get a bunch of mailbag questions, so you can look forward to that. But thank you to our Substack subscribers who, again, we really want to say thank you for helping support this podcast and the expansion of it. Hopefully you've been enjoying the newsletter that we've been doing, trying to put out at least 2 of those a week. And you can subscribe for as cheap as $5 a month or $50 a year. And that's what we're doing. But otherwise, thank you to our sponsors, Full Pull Wines and Watson's Counter, who has reopened their new location in Ballard. It's over on 24th. I would absolutely recommend checking it out. Really good stuff there. And they've talked to us about maybe doing some events there at some point. So, that's something to keep your ears open for. But other than that, I am Jeremiah O'Shan signing off for my co-host Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is Nos Adietes. Remember, you'll never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.